From fabulous Las Vegas, Nevada, this is Pod Therapy. Real people, real problems, and real therapists. You can submit your questions anonymously at podtherapy.net or email us at podtherapyguys@gmail.com. Due to our every 2-week recording schedule, we are consistently behind in the news and irrelevant by the time that this episode airs. This week, we're going to do something a little bit different. We're going to get ahead of the news by predicting what we think will be in the news by the time this episode airs. I believe that after continual drops in the polls, Trump decides to up his attacks on Joe Biden by accusing him of harboring Vlad the Impaler.
I believe Vice President Pence initiates the 25th Amendment, and President Trump fires Vice President Pence, thereby eliminating the problem of the 25th Amendment.
Jim Jobin will be a department head at Nevada State College.
And there you have it, the news for this week. And now, broadcasting from the Churn, I'm Nick Tangeman. That's Jim Jobin. It's time for some Pod Therapy.
We need to make that a regular bit where we're predicting it. One of these days
for
we'll get one right.
For the second episode, we should always do that. Because we're always recording two every 2 weeks.
That's a good idea. Yeah.
So,
and start projecting what we think is going to be in the headlines in the future.
That was a good one.
One of these days we'll get one right. That's what's in the
probably
the
not
going
to be Jacob's.
Probably not going to be. I think Jacob's is probably a little out there.
I think mine's more likely.
Everything's possible. Who knows? In all universes, something could happen. Yeah, I could see myself weeks and weeks ago. If we would have done this bit, I could have seen myself being like, "I'll bet the president gets corona," and at the time I'd have been like, "That's not going to happen." And then of course it did. So okay. I actually thought about predicting this, which I do think might happen in the near future. It's a little bit morbid, but I think it's probably true. I think one of the people in the senior cabinet or advisor level that has been in the periphery of Trump, I think one of them will pass because of corona. So
I mean, statistically,
at the age level, a lot of them are.
When the news got announced that Hope Hicks had it,
yeah,
I told Laura, I was like, everybody's got it.
They've
all got it.
Oh, yeah.
Because they were so proud of that bubble.
Right.
That once you're inside the bubble, there was no protection.
Yeah, everybody was fine.
Yeah.
Jeez.
So, I mean, you could be right. I hope that's not the case.
Well, we'll see. I mean, obviously, it's hard to, headline drop in our show because what we just talked about, we record so much in the past. But as we record this, Chris Christie's been in the hospital now for 10 days with COVID. And so...
not really being talked about.
Yeah. I didn't even know he was in the hospital until today.
Yeah. He's in the ICU. And so it is not great. So we'll, hey, hang in there, Chris Christie. But, not to be morbid or flippant about it.
Herman Cain is still dead.
Yeah, Herman Cain didn't make it.
Still
has not recovered.
Not according
to
his Twitter,
I would not have guessed that.
No, his Twitter is very active. I don't know if you follow him on Twitter.
I don't. No.
You should. He should.
Really?
Yeah, he tweets from the grave all the time. Yeah. Oh, yeah, he has lots of opinions about policies. He still thinks masks are a joke. So, great. Watch out for that one.
Okay.
But, speaking of interesting news and predictions, a journal came out this past month with some very interesting research. This came out of the JAMAnetwork.com. And this is a really interesting piece of data that came out of this. But it was talking about how when they're studying depression during this COVID crisis, there was a very, very powerful predictor that would actually result in a person being 3 times more likely to have major depressive disorder during COVID. Now, Nick, you've already read the headline, so you know what it is. So I'll have to quiz Jacob on this one to see if I can get a survey says.
All right, go ahead.
So, Jacob, if you had to guess, what do you think studies show makes somebody 3 times more likely to end up with major depressive disorder, specifically during the Corona era? What thing in that person's life do you think would make them 3 times more likely to get depression during the COVID era?
Employment problems.
Yeah.
Pretty close.
That was it. Well, it had to do with...
Or like unemployment.
So specifically what the studies show, or what the studies showed, is that if a person had less than $5,000 specifically in a bank account, if they had less than $5,000 during this COVID era, they were 3 times more likely to report all the symptoms of major depressive disorder.
At the beginning of it?
Anytime. At any point during Corona land. So as they've been studying people struggling with mental illness during this time, they're noticing people because they're asking lots of questions about them, and one of the things is like, oh, how are you doing financially? What's going on in your bank account? And they noticed, oh, all the people that have $5,000 or less, 3 times more likely that population says we have major depressive disorder as well.
Huh. Yeah.
Very significant.
If I had to have guessed, I probably would have guessed something with relationships, like as far as how close people are with other people, or how many, like, connectedness.
Yeah, if they report separation or something.
Right.
Yeah.
But or like how well they are still able to maintain connection to other human beings throughout COVID.
Right.
But now, having seen this makes perfect sense.
It really does.
Because really, like, nothing hits your survival instincts quite like financial security.
Right.
In the world we live in today.
Right.
We're different animals now than we were when we were cavemen.
Exactly. Yeah. And this, I find it interesting for a couple of reasons. I mean, obviously, on a mental health level, I'm very interested in studying depression during this era, because I think that we expect it to go up. It has. Mm-hmm. Suicide rates have gone up. Google reported the highest searches for anxiety or anxiety-related things, like how to treat anxiety, in the history of Google. They've reported more in this year than has ever been recorded. And so, clearly, the problems are everywhere. Mm-hmm. But I think it's important because, and this, I think, tickles some of your background, Nick, as coming from especially studies in sociology, with that emphasis, the clinical training that you've had specifically likes you to think also about systems and about like how, it's a bigger picture than just the individual in their truth. And I think that this kind of a headline and this kind of a study brings something to our conversation as mental health therapists or therapists in general that we don't talk a lot about. We tend to talk to the person who's suffering and how to help them. But I think a study like this helps you understand the way you build your society and the rules that you create in your society that govern how money moves around and the access to resources that humans have. This directly correlates to things like suicidal depression and mental health.
Oh, yeah.
Humans have limits. And so it's something that I think we casually dismiss sometimes, and we just think, nope, mental health is this personal thing, has to do with you and your chemistry and what's... No, we can predict, like, if the government released universal basic income right now and said, hey, this is a shit show, everybody gets $15,000. Boom. That, by the definition of this study, means all these people that are 3 times more likely to be depressed would suddenly be quite impacted by that. We would literally have less deaths. And I think that's meaningful to discuss on a therapy show, that the way you build your society absolutely affects mental health.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, that could be one of those things that keeps somebody, going just a little bit longer. Knowing like, oh, okay, there is some hope in sight.
Right.
I'm completely underwater right now, but I've got this thing that's coming my way.
Yes.
And then I mean, obviously, there's a whole bunch of discussions that need to happen around that on a wider political scale.
Sure.
But I mean, yeah, if you can find a way to help those individuals and give them some sort of relief, yeah, you're literally saving lives.
Yes. And again, I'm not an economist. Like, I'm not going to pretend like, oh, see, there's sad people, and so you should just make this major economic decision. No, I'm not going to simplify it that way. I certainly am not an elected guy. I don't know a jack about any of this. But my little corner of the universe that I monitor, it's, I think, valuable to the public to share with you. There is a very clear correlation between literally the balance in your bank account and your mental health. And it's something we don't talk a lot about on the show. We talk about how to deal with it once it shows up, but prevention is pretty important too. And Jacob has thought.
Jim doesn't know anything about anything.
My lawyer would like you to please remember, Pod Therapy does not offer financial advice, and Jim doesn't know jack.
Yes, that's always good to remember that.
No, it's one of those very simple things that is turns out a really good way to help poor people is to get the money.
Yeah. I was listening to Penn Sunday School a little while ago, and Penn is a notorious libertarian. I mean, just well known, for his libertarian views. And you'd think that the very last thing in the libertarian playbook would be government takes taxpayer money and redistributes to the population directly. You'd think of that more as a social welfare thing that tends to be more of a progressive agenda. But I was listening to him contemplate it, and he was like, okay, so like we have a lot of studies that just kind of say that's actually a very effective way to like improve your society, and it's a pretty direct way. And libertarians are not like, there shouldn't exist taxes. Like, no libertarian that I know says, and again, there's no libertarian book, but like, they don't say we shouldn't have a society, let's make it the Wild West. Everybody for himself. Like, no. We've agreed. We have some basic social constructs. One of those is we have a central agency. It does siphon off money from all of us, and there's some kind of system to figuring out how to do that equitably, and then they use that money toward things that matter, right? But the direct, universal basic income or something that creates a way for humans to have money is very important to humans living at all and being depressed. It's really important.
Yeah. And then ultimately when you factor in all the other things that we end up paying for at the end. Ultimately. Versus what we spent if we just did something direct.
Yeah.
For example, we work in a field where we deal with a lot of folks for mental health and behavioral health issues, addiction, stuff like that. And there are programs that are funded to work with all of these populations, especially like the homeless population, all of this. And sometimes there's some blowback and people are like, why are we spending so much money, and we're just giving these people these things. Right. Like, okay, but like we're talking 10 cents on the dollar to what you would be spending if they went to the emergency room instead of going to this facility.
Right.
So by spending money in some areas, you save money in a lot of areas. Our field, I think specifically, we notice that a lot. And we all kind of have this understanding, like, yes, we get that, funding this shelter is going to be expensive.
Right.
But it's nothing. It's a drop in the bucket compared to the amount of money that you have to spend to fix the problem later.
Yes. I think there's a lot of fairness to that. And again, I mean, obviously we're not a political show, but I found this data super relevant. We are globally going through the same thing. And this rarely happens in the history of our species. It has rarely happened in the history of all of our people and all of the continents that we all relate to each other about a problem that is influencing the way each of us lives our lives.
Right.
And this is happening. It's really happening. And as that's happening and we're saying, wow, boy, people are locked in their homes, people are interrupted at work, people are missing their family stuff, people are missing their vacations. How can we study depression? Can we understand what a big corollary with that is? What causes it? What do we notice the trend? The trend is $5,000. And it's interesting to have like a smoking gun number. That's like, no, we can like, because people will be like, oh, come on, Jim, it's a slippery slope. If you start helping people have money or you create a system in which, maybe the wealthy pay extra and that way there's more redistributed to the people or whatever system you jerry-rig, what's the line?
Sure.
It's $5,000.
Sure.
That's the line. Well, how do you know that?
No,
we have
a
data.
Slippery slope argument.
Oh, yeah.
Don't give me a fucking slippery slope argument.
Yeah. It's like, well, where does it stop? $5,000. We can number this, and sometimes that's a very interesting thing. You can decrease, by threefold, prevalence of depression rates in our society, because of this, which is, I think, a relevant conversation to have.
Yeah.
So I don't know. I mean, that's not to lobby for any political view, I guess. I might be a therapist that's in your ear and, brings up mental health news to you. And I saw this come across the wires in the journals, and I thought, boy, that's interesting. And I think it's timely as we enter into an election season to discuss how we build our society.
3 times more prevalent is a big deal.
Yeah. And that you can number it. $5,000. That to me is what really hit me between the eyes. Because it's one thing if you said, did you know that poor people are more depressed? I'd go, okay, yeah, sure, that's interesting. Sure. But it's a big foggy blur. Who knows what happens in there? And it's like, no. 3 times 5,000.
Yeah.
That's a big ledge, like for you to just indicate. Like if you give the people with 5,000 1,000 more, it is very likely they'll fall out of the 3x pool, and so like there's definitely going to be a fading correlation, right? That's fine. I believe in that. But it's interesting that, because I think that sometimes there's a problem of economy that we discuss sometimes, and I think this is a psychology discussion, which is a lot of people say, well, if everybody had more money, things would just cost more and it wouldn't matter anyway, right? So like right now you can go to Jack in the Box and you can get 2 tacos for 99 cents. If everybody had more money, Jack in the Box would start charging $1 a taco, okay? So there'd be 2 tacos for $2 because there's more money to go around. And again, Jim's not an economist. I don't, necessarily understand the key indicators to inflation and things like that. I get that. But I think it's interesting to appreciate human psychology. We're talking about $5,000 in the bank, which is really a supply of savings to protect people. That's what that is. And so humans sense more security and safety when that supply is at $5,000 or better. And when it's under that, they start to become depressed. And suicide is one of the great killers of our species. It's up there with heart disease. Okay. So that's an appreciable problem that I think we as a society are allowed to look at. If I told you, people that have this much of a bank account start to become much more likely to die, I think you start looking at that and going, well, geez, this rises to the level of notice as a society to discuss and think about,
Right.
That is worth it. I think we can be on team humanity. I think we can just be on team not dying, and anti-depression.
Nope.
I feel like Jim can speak for the podcast with that.
Wow. Thanks, man.
I would like to be
Rare permission.
anti-dying.
Jim Joba does not speak for the podcast.
It's always good to cover your ass.
Yeah. But and then also looking at this, the social worker in me is kind of looking at this and saying, okay, so obviously I know that the big argument with doing any kind of social program dealing with this is going to be the belief of inequity. Well, that's not fair. Why are you giving these people extra help and not giving it to everybody? Blah blah blah. Whatever.
Right.
But then the other thing is I think obviously it's going to be having a savings account, having money that you can fall back on in an emergency. Having an emergency fund is very, very important. And a lot of people can't do that.
Right.
So if we're not going to act directly into this, we should at a minimum be looking at what are the obstacles that keep people from being able to create their own emergency fund.
Yeah.
Let's take a look at that.
Right.
And let's look at some of these obstacles that are keeping people from financial independence on their own and being able to create their own emergency funding in times like this. I'm fine having that discussion too.
Well, and here's the thing, and I could see people saying, shut up and dribble. You guys are therapists. Why are you talking at all about finances and politicking and social policy? It's all mental health, friends. It's all mental health. Nick and I are the hospital at the bottom of the cliff. I think we're allowed to look up and wonder why they're not building a fence.
Right.
And I think that sometimes you're going to hear us kind of step back and try to be that voice in your ear that says, it's okay for you to, and I think it's trans-political. I realize that there are governmental philosophies, and that's fair. I think you can say, hey, listen, I have a conservative philosophy. I really believe that the bigger government gets, the more wasteful it is, and the more, problems it can actually cause as it tries to help. Okay, I'm totally prepared to hear that,
Sure.
And I'll hear the other side, the progressive side that says the entire concept of government is to serve its people. If it's not doing that, then what the hell's the point of it? You finance it right and you get it going. And I think that there's everything in between.
Right. And that's not to say that there isn't a fiscally conservative approach to address the problem.
Yeah, right.
There could be.
But I think we can
should still have
mutually
that
stand there and notice that the kitchen's on fire.
Sure.
We can discuss how to put it out, and you can have a different approach to me, but I like that we're noticing it, and I think that's what this journal entry does, is I think it's teaching us, hey guys, when human beings have a savings account beneath $5,000, depression rates skyrocket, X3. And depression correlates to opiate use, drug abuse, and suicide. And I think that this becomes, on my soapbox just for a minute, a little bit more of a sociological conversation because people say, oh, the poor people, they all use drugs. All the poor people,
Right.
They're always drinking. All the poor people, they're poor because of that. Well, a study like this kind of indicates I don't think that depressed people have less money. I think that the study didn't accidentally discover that the hyper-depressed happen to not have money. I think it's the other way around.
Right.
I think it's the other way around. And so I think that also teaches you what correlates with depression. Substance abuse, right? Substance abuse correlates to depression, poor self-care, risk-taking behavior, all sorts of things that you tend to associate with poverty. If you associate crime and drug trafficking and other problems with poverty, I think you're allowed to start asking some chicken and egg questions, being like, well, wait a minute. If you can start to target the poverty first, does that start to ease some of the social ills that we don't like that exist inside of poverty land? Hey, Jim's not a sociologist, okay? I'm just the guy at the bottom of the cliff looking up, talking about fences. But this is valuable, And so I bring it up because I think, it's relevant data. I think it's interesting. It talks about our society. It talks about Corona land. I think it's also relevant because as we record this, which we're recording this a little bit in the past from when you're hearing it, we just had World Mental Health Day. And, that's an interesting little hashtag. It exists for a little while. People say, oh, it's a good day to talk about mental health. And NAMI, the National Alliance of Mental Illness, is running a campaign called Vote Mental Health. And they're not endorsing a candidate on either side, but they're really encouraging people to make that a question they want to ask candidates. Is like, hey, what's your mental health policy at the state level or at our county level or at our city level? What's your mental health policy, Governor? What's your mental health policy, Mr. President or Vice President? Great. I want those questions. But I guess the thing I want to drip onto people in the A block here is part of the asking people what their mental health policy is not just asking how they're going to put more therapists out there. You're also asking, how are you going to put more than $5,000 in the pockets of the average citizen? Mm-hmm. And that's actually a mental health question, which maybe you didn't know about.
Right.
But, hey, good question. Lots of different ways to attack the problem. There's conservative solutions. There's liberal solutions. There's libertarian solutions. There's socialist solutions. I'm not here to advocate for one of them. I'm just here to point out where the fire is and invite everybody to think about it. Yep.
Corona Land, worst theme park ever.
Even worse than what was that class action suit documentary?
Sounds worse.
Oh, I want to know who the mascot of Corona Land is. That's one thing that this whole thing has really missed.
A mascot?
Yeah, we've really dropped the ball. To have such a unifying. I wonder if we're going to name Generation Z. Because I already think that's a dumb name. I hate that we're naming them Generation Z. I think it's just disrespectful, and I think it's dumb. But my generation
disrespectful.
Because
go ahead, finish your thought.
Because Generation X was disrespectful. Like I thought that was disrespectful. It's just a mean moniker, and then Z is just lazy. You're just literally adding to the alphabet.
I agree with lazy.
It's a very lazy way to name it.
I don't see how either of them is disrespectful.
Well, like millennials, we got named because of an interesting epoch of time that happened in the calendar and the way that particular date influenced our lives and it became a known variable. Oh, the millennial shift is a specific thing you think about. And so my generation got stamped with that one particular event. And I wonder if Corona will be an event that we stamp on Generation Z and say their childhood was defined by this. And they are the generation that did this, I mean, I can't think of another example. They did this. They're responsible. There's not another generation I can think of that globally, to a person, all went through the same exact problem. Even world wars didn't apply universally everywhere. Yeah. But this one did. This is a very interesting thing.
I would disagree with that last part, but I see what you mean.
My point is, let's have a voting contest. Let's rename them. That's what the show can do. Anyway, Sorry to dive into politics, folks. Thanks for putting up with me. I hope that it's something that gives you something to think about, really. I'm not really advocating. You didn't hear me name drop a candidate or anything like that. I just I hope that you think about voting mental health and thinking about mental health problems as more than just how folks get help when they need it, but how we get preventative with some of this stuff, too. I think that's a good conversation to have.
Mm-hmm. I will not.
We're going to take a quick break. When we come back, we are discussing getting help for my dad. Not my dad, but the writer's dad. You're listening to Pod Therapy.
This week's Theraproducer sponsor is Nathan's Hot Dog Scoop. This week's theme is the Beatles.
Oh.
Which Beatle do we know by his middle name?
What?
Doug.
Doug.
Dung Beetle. Joseph Dung Beetle.
A lot of people don't know. Yeah. He was named for his uncle, but he goes by Dung.
If you would like to join Nathan's Hot Dog Scoop and make the show possible, go to patreon.com/therapy and sign up. That's patreon.com/therapy.
You guys are going to be mad at me because I don't know very much about the Beatles. I would struggle to name all four. Is there four?
Oh,
there's
really?
4 of them, right? I feel like there's 4.
Yeah.
I feel like there was 4 in the picture.
Wow, I gave you way too much credit.
Way too much.
I mean,
way too much.
The whole thing when you said...
I know there's 4 because they walk across the street in a picture. I remember there being 4 guys.
One
of them doesn't wear shoes.
Do you know what the street is?
I'm going to go with Yellow Submarine Street.
Correct.
I mean, I knew your music...
That I'm musically illiterate.
Not good when you thought Stairway to Heaven was done by Metallica.
Yeah.
But
yeah,
I also thought
Ballroom Bash was done by
Metallica.
Yeah, I thought Ballroom Bash was done by Crucial Taunt, the make-believe band in Wayne's World.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Okay.
I remember being corrected on that once.
Yeah.
Because somebody had it
that
playing, and I was like,
actually-
"Oh, I love that song."
The song
like
is
Crucial Taunt, and
the
they were
song
like,
is
"Who the
also
hell's
called-
Crucial Taunt?"
The song is called Ballroom Blitz,
That one.
Yeah.
That one.
not Ballroom Bash.
What am I thinking of? It was a Monster
Bash.
Bash.
That's also not Bash.
All right, let me see if I can
Also
name
not
all four.
Metallica.
I'll name all four, and you can tell me which
Okay.
guy is.
Oh, let's see if you can name all four. I'm curious.
All right, hold on.
Who's the drummer?
Oh God, no,
I'll
I can't.
give you
I
a-
can't do that. I
Okay,
can't
you
tell
can't
you
do
what they
instruments.
do.
Can't do instruments.
Oh, wait a minute. I know the drummer because Nick told me a hilarious joke.
I'll give you a
about it
hint. The
once.
drummer is still alive.
Yes.
Okay, okay. Paul can sing, so he seems like the singer, and I think Paul can play guitar. So there's a guy named Paul.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay,
What
Paul.
instrument did he
Paul
play?
McCartney. Isn't that his
Yes.
name? All right,
Good
Paul,
job.
Paul
Good job.
McCartney.
Which, by the way, is my guess for the trivia question.
All right, Slash.
Good.
Slash was not in the Beatles.
All right, let's try again.
Well, not for lack of trying.
I'm gonna go. Well, okay, so Lennon died, so that's John Lennon.
Right.
All right,
Correct.
all right.
Correct. Two.
So, yeah, maybe his middle name was John.
Mm-hmm.
So I got Paul. I got John. Oh God, he's a Star. Star. Moon.
Bingo.
Something Moon. No, Star. It's Star. Something Star. His name's Star. His name, or he's the. Am I thinking of the guy from Kiss?
No.
Doesn't the guy in Kiss have a star in his
There
face?
is Star Child in Kiss.
So that's not the same guy.
That's Paul
No.
Stanley. Different person.
Okay.
But there is a person in the Beatles with Star in his name.
Star. Bingo. Bingo Star.
Close.
So close.
Really?
Ringo.
Oh, yeah, that one.
Giving you a hint and everything.
Oh, you know, but here's why I even know that one, because Nick has a hilarious joke about that.
It wasn't a joke. It was true.
That was a real thing? What was it, like
they
Johnny
were-
Carson or something like that?
No, they were being interviewed. The Beatles were being interviewed by by the press or whatever, and somebody asked John, said, "Is Ringo the best drummer of the Beatles?"
No, is
No, is Ringo the best drummer in the world?
Drummer in the world.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then John was like, "No, he's not even the best drummer in the Beatles."
That's hilarious. That's hilarious.
And
So,
then-
okay, I got three of them,
You got
right?
three.
Yeah.
Oh, God. The fourth guy.
I would bet a lot of money
No, he was not
that
gonna
this
get
last
this one.
one you would never be able to name.
No.
I'm going to go with, okay. I'm just going to throw out an English name.
Okay.
Because they're English,
Fact.
right?
Yeah.
They're
Good-
from,
you are
they're English.
spitting truth today, Joe.
Well, except for this one. This one was from
All right,
Italy.
so you got,
That's true.
oh, shit. All right. Well,
European.
I don't
Throw out
believe
a
you.
European
I don't
name.
believe you. There's no way. All right. So what is English names here? We got Paul. That feels like an English name.
Uh-huh.
John got an English name. Ringo threw me. Okay, that's not a traditional English. You got James, George. You got Mary. That's more of a girl's name. Sometimes it's a boy's name. Mary. George.
All right, the last one you're thinking of is
George,
very hairy.
yes.
George.
George.
Yeah.
His name's really George?
Yes.
Yeah.
Is this like the
And he's hairy. His son is hairy.
George Harry?
His
George
son is really hairy.
Harry's son.
There it is.
George Harry's son? George
Harrison.
Harrison.
Yeah,
Yes.
I got it.
George Harrison.
So wait, which one has the middle name?
He was right.
Paul.
James Paul McCartney,
Yeah.
Oh,
John Winston Lennon,
yeah,
Yeah.
that feels right.
and then the other two didn't have middle names.
So
Richard-
you're telling me somebody just named their kid Ringo and
No,
left
no,
it
no,
right
no,
there?
Ringo is a nickname.
Oh.
Richard Starkey,
Yeah, I'd go by Ringo too.
and then George Harrison.
All right, well there you go. So if you tuned
The
in to
best
find
part
out who the
about Ringo
Beatles
Starr-
are, you just did.
The best part about Ringo Starr's name is that it's the star part is just a derivative of his last name.
Yeah.
It's not like a just a completely
Nothing
from
in his name is accurate.
cloth.
That's
Well,
funny.
no, I mean star is the first syllable of his
Starkey.
real last name.
Starkey.
Of his
Okay.
given last name, yeah. So
Yeah.
it's not just from whole cloth
So-
as a
Ringo
nickname.
Starr.
So now I know that the next commercial break, you are absolutely screwed.
Okay. If I've tipped my cards.
Yeah.
Yeah, Jim's musical knowledge. I'm good whenever it's like,
All
you
right.
know, you read the lyrics and I got to like get the song. I'm pretty good at that. I don't
I'll
know
tell
like
you one
names.
thing that made me absolutely love Matt Donnelly's son.
Okay.
And that is Matt has or had, I don't know if he still has it, but a coffee mug
Okay.
with a picture of the Beatles, the one that you're referring to, which is them crossing Abbey Road.
Abbey Road.
Okay. So it wasn't called Yellow Submarine.
It was
Avenue.
not, weirdly it wasn't. And Matt's son pointed at the mug at George Harrison specifically and said, "Is that Jacob?" You
This
and me,
kid.
you and me, kid, we're gonna get along fine.
Yeah, you can stay.
Yeah.
Getting help for my dad. Hey guys, how can I convince my dad to go to therapy? He's a very religious man who doesn't believe much in therapy, and his only form of coping with his unbelievable amount of issues is by prayer. He faced a lot of trauma as a kid and didn't have a father as well. He is the main trigger to my anxiety, paranoia, and multiple other issues that I mostly got from him. And no matter how much progress I make in therapy, I always relapse because of his behaviors. Distancing myself is not an option at the moment.
Okay.
A lot of things.
Well,
to
if
that.
you are not a patron of the show, we did spend like
an hour,
almost an hour
talking about religion today,
with Jim,
which will
true.
offer you no help.
It won't help you with this, but that was the topic.
It was interesting.
I would call it interesting.
Convincing
generous.
someone who's very religious. I guess we're kind of assuming that part of the religion, that the religious part has...
That it's a barrier.
Yeah, that's a barrier to him.
Seems
going
like
to
it is.
Therapy. Yeah.
Yeah, there's a lot of pieces to this. Like the writer saying, which I appreciate, the writer, saying like, look, I'm getting help. Okay, good.
Right.
We're going to say we want you to do that. My father's influence in my life and his unchecked mental illnesses or behaviors cause me to quote unquote relapse. I might nudge you toward the word regress, because I think that leaves a little bit more of a fader kind of approach. Like things can get better, things can also go backward. It isn't black or white sometimes, especially if you're dealing with anxiety and things like that. I don't know that I relapse in anxiety. Just sometimes we regress. So I definitely hear that question. I mean, I think it's a good question, and like it is true that sometimes you're co-located with somebody that you really can't not be with, and if they refuse to get help, it does trickle into your truth, and that can be tricky. I guess I want to be, an individual, though. I want to nudge you and be like, hey, you can't count on your treatment being your ability to change somebody else, right?
Right.
That can't be part of your treatment plan. Like, yeah, I still want to respect what you're sharing with us. I think you're just telling us your truth. And, of course, I think our first point is you do not have control over your father at all, so you've got to work on coping with his presence in your life, I think,
Yes.
fundamentally.
Yes. Ultimately, I think for the writer, I think that is going to be your solution for yourself.
Yes.
Is I hear a lot of people say, kind of saying, like using the expression, them pushing my buttons.
Uh-huh. Yeah.
And to kind of change the perspective of that to, like, well, they're your buttons.
Right.
All right, let's find ways of, building something around, some kind of protective factor around these buttons so that they don't get pushed.
Right.
And let's not put your buttons where they can be pushed.
Right.
And let's try to create some distance, because they're
Boundaries.
your buttons.
Yeah.
Yeah, they're your buttons. No one else should be touching those. So we do want to take accountability for our own mental health, like what's going on in our own lives. And so building up some boundaries. So that's one thing.
Yeah.
The second thing is, how do we convince somebody who doesn't want to go to therapy to go to therapy?
Which is a relevant question.
Yes.
Please don't mistake our first thoughts as dismissing this part of it. Like, no, we're definitely going to answer that. That's a good question. We just want to make sure we're reinforcing you on a personal level first.
Right.
That you're thinking.
And I heard this as, I give it a little bit more of the benefit of the doubt to the writer here too, which is, let's look at this too. Just they want to help their father,
absolutely,
and they care about their father.
Yes.
Let's look at that as also a possibility as well, because that's how I interpreted this.
Right. Good point. Yeah, very.
I could be wrong, but that's how that was my interpretation of it.
Let's go with that. I think that, and I think that is the assumption, right? Because you're writing in saying, I care about my dad. My dad's been through a lot. My dad's stuff trickled into me as a person. I'm not necessarily blaming him. I'm just observing that this is the truth. How do you help somebody that won't get help? So obviously, the point that the writer seems to be making of dad is very religious, and he has reluctance about this. You didn't tell us what religion. That matters quite a bit, I think, because different religions have a different way to approach making
it's like
room
Christian
for therapy.
Science or something, then
you never know.
A whole different ballgame.
Yeah, everything's different. Like in like American evangelical Christianity, there is an increasing movement toward mental health, and there's a way to make the case that this is good and fine, and there's nothing wrong with that, and like more and more Christians are becoming more and more comfortable with it, and I think there's a way to make that case. Not knowing what religion your dad is, it's hard to speak from his culture and say, hey, there's an example to follow here, or follow, go introduce your dad to this particular book on the subject or whatever. Sometimes I think that's really helpful, because it speaks that person's language in their religion. It doesn't ask them to dismiss it. It asks them to work with it. And it creates a new voice that they can see that my religion makes room for this. It's okay. But I would argue this. Almost all religions emphasize the concept of wise counsel and emphasize, they might use different words to describe it. They might call it a ministry or whatever. But they emphasize this idea that humans connect with other humans, and perhaps they are mentored or discipled or coached, or they're challenged. And sometimes, I think, especially with men, framing it that way sometimes gets them a little bit more traction. When you say, hey, listen, I'm not saying you're broken, man. I'm not saying you need some shrink to, tell you what's wrong with you. I'm saying that you're not living your best life. You know that. You're an individual. You believe in self-change. You believe in fixing things. Let's go partner you with a coach, somebody that can help you do that. Mm-hmm. And there's lots of therapists out there that will frame what they do slightly differently to reach that kind of a person. When people look me up online, they'll see me describing myself as a therapist and with my credentials. They'll see me describing myself from the Christian angle, which is appealing to some people. And they'll go, okay, well, I don't want to see a therapist, but I'll talk to this Christian guy who was a pastor once. Like, that feels different. I don't mind talking to a pastor, but I won't talk to a therapist. Cool. Like, whatever. Just sit down. And let's get to work, right? Mm-hmm. And so that's fine. Some people need that. Some people want the life coach angle. And they'll say, well, I don't want to talk to a therapist. But I would talk to a life coach about how to make my life more efficient and win at things.
I'd recommend it.
Great. Yeah. Let me recommend a life coach to you.
Life consulting.
Yeah. But whatever gets them in the room to sit down.
Exactly.
Yeah, I think that's what's important.
Yeah. There's ways, in therapy we can call this like therapeutic judo.
Yeah.
In a way, or you're kind of rolling with the resistance where we don't want to stop their momentum. We want to find where their momentum is going and then just kind of
work with that.
Yeah, work with that. So whatever you think the angle is that he would be willing to talk to another person, even if it's not, you don't even have to start with a therapist. I mean, you could start with, if he's religious, having him speak to the
spiritual advisor,
whoever that may be. If
it's a great place to start.
I was going to recommend a religious therapist.
Yeah. I mean, find that common ground.
Find a bridge.
Yeah.
Yep.
Anything that gets a person moving in the right direction, Ryder. I think that sometimes, obviously, I believe very strongly that therapists are highly trained. I think we're very good at what we do, and I think that we have to demonstrate that in order to do our profession. And so, obviously, that's great. But you've also heard us talk on the show a lot about don't let best be the enemy of better. Mm-hmm. Like, okay, is there a gold standard somewhere in your city that's like the best therapist who's ever lived? Yeah. If you live in Las Vegas, that's
best
me.
Of Las Vegas.
Yeah, that's me if you're in Vegas. If you're not in Vegas, somebody else.
If they won Best of Las Vegas,
then they're the best, period. And if they didn't win the Best of Las Vegas and it was me, they should have won the Best of Las Vegas, and it's a scam.
Right.
And none of this should matter.
Those votes shouldn't count if they were sent in after October 31st.
Throw those ballots out. Yeah. So, but I don't want that to be something that gets in your way. So what could you do, Ryder? What practical advice could we give you? One thing is, obviously, you didn't tell us what religion Dad is, but use that. And so if he does go to a church, he's a prayerful person. If he's doing church online, or if he's historically called a church in town his home, whatever that is, I would go look into that church, call them or get on their website, and ask, hey, do you have a counseling ministry? That's very Christian language. Other religions describe that language differently. They might call it discipleship, or they might call it mentorship, or they might call it spiritual formation, or whatever they're going to call it. Those are all very English words. In Islam, they might call it something very different. But whatever your background is, I would encourage you to contact that faith institution and ask, hey, do you guys have anything available for folks who might need that? Don't mention Dad's name. Don't name drop him. Don't say this is for my dad, Robert Thompson. Not cool, because you're outing him, and that might embarrass him in his place of faith. Depends on where he stands. He might be like a deacon in that church. Right. That's not appropriate. If he is a person who has stature in that church, and you don't think that would work because, and I'm assuming Christianity here, but, pardon me. If your father is a person of stature in that faith institution, search your area, your state, your city for faith-based therapists of your particular persuasion. Here in Las Vegas, we have Mormon therapists that practice in an LDS angle. We have obvious Christian evangelical therapists. We have Jewish therapists. We have Islamic therapists. There are Hindu therapists. There are Buddhist therapists. We have therapists that really align with very specific worldviews, and they share that because they want to be an open door to folks that might otherwise struggle. That probably exists in your town.
Yeah.
Or you can go to psychologytoday.com and you can click the filter button and you can filter by religion, which might sound a little weird to you until you see stories like this when you realize, like, no, people sometimes need to be able to do that.
People care about it.
Yep.
That's good. So go to psychologytoday.com and you can search for therapists in your area, type in your zip code, and on the left-hand side there'll be a drop-down of filters that you can filter by. You can filter by insurance, and you can also filter by religious persuasion. Or you can actually just call the insurance card. If you're on your dad's insurance, it sounds like you live with dad. If you're able to figure out who dad's insurance is, you could always call that insurance and say, can I get a list of therapists that we're allowed to see? Sometimes they'll say, yeah, there's not really a list, but there's like a company. That's who you go to. And you can call that company and say, hey, I'm asking for help for my father. He's this religion. Do you have anybody that matches that profile? And most companies, most agencies or networks will say, yeah, we do. Let's get you connected with so-and-so. That is their background. And great, we want to find you the right alignment. Yep. So that could be a great step in that direction, Ryder.
Yeah.
But, I like that you're willing to try to get help for dad. And I like that you're able to also connect and correlate, what it's like in your life versus dad's. The other thing I would encourage you to do is when you're coming home from therapy, talk about it. Sometimes just sharing with other people. Yeah, I'm working on some good stuff in therapy. Be careful not to use it as passive aggressive.
Yeah.
To say like, yeah, I'm really working on not lying to your kids about not getting them a skateboard for Christmas. Like, okay, that was obvious, or I'm working on forgiving you, like don't do that, like that doesn't help people get closer to talking to a therapist. Just say, yeah, I've been struggling with some stuff and, we're doing some good work and I'm feeling better. That's the key. Just share, I'm feeling better.
Yeah.
And I think when other people hear that, they go, well, what do you guys do? Well, obviously we're talking, but it's intentional. It's strategic. And obviously they're a professional and they know what they're doing. And so I'm feeling better. Sometimes that's all people need to hear, and that will nudge them in the right direction.
Yeah, I think that's definitely the route to go. Roll with it, not against it.
Yep. We are going to take a quick break, and when we come back, we are discussing cheating and honesty. You're listening to Pod Therapy.
This week's Theraproducer sponsor is Dr. Ben Don. Today's second trivia question in honor of Theraproducer Ben is...
Bingo star.
I'm just going to talk to Jacob. How many Beatles songs have a drum solo?
What?
How many Beatles songs have a drum solo?
Well, nobody's going to just count in the catalog and know it.
If you'd like to join Dr. Ben Don and make the show possible, you go to patreon.com/therapy and sign up. Again, that's patreon.com.
Okay, I know it. There's that one that starts with... Is that a solo? Do you think that counts?
It's definitely not drums.
Oh. Is that a person just saying sugar-dugga-dugga-dugga?
I'm trying to think through what would count as a drum solo. I'm trying to think through different songs.
It's a legit drum solo.
Okay.
Wow.
Not a trick question.
Is it a popular song?
Well, I just gave away the
many?
answer.
Oh. Is it called drum solo?
It sounds like the answer is one.
Yes.
Yeah. Which is very close to what my answer was about to be.
Damn it.
Which was 0.
Yeah.
Oh, because he used singulars.
They had to, he did not want to do it.
Yeah.
They had to twist his arm.
I can't think of what it is. Because I'm trying to think through it, and I can't think of one. That's why my answer was meant to be 0.
What song is it?
So what is it?
It is The End from Abbey Road.
Oh, yeah.
I don't think I've ever heard that.
So I reached out to a friend of the pod,
Paul McCartney.
George Harrison.
Yeah.
George Harrison's ghost.
George, it's me, Nick.
All very close.
Stop seancing me.
Brian.
Brian
Harrison.
Music nut.
Yeah, because he is a huge Beatles fan. So I was
Yeah.
like, hey, I need 2 trivia questions for the show.
Yeah.
And he sent me like 9 of them.
Yeah, that sounds like Brian.
Good one.
So
I like that one. That's a good one.
we may do those if we have got time.
Yeah. Well, now
I
that I know
did
who
just
the Beatles
listen
are.
to Abbey Road. It's been a few months, but during COVID, I have listened to. I have all of the. If I don't have all of the Beatles albums on LP, I have close to it.
Huh.
Wow.
And I've listened, I think, to all of the ones that I have, with a couple of exceptions of like bootlegs and stuff like that.
Right.
But I've listened to all of them during COVID.
What
so
is
I definitely
LP?
listened to the vinyl. The vinyl
Oh, okay.
record.
Cool.
Yeah.
That's really cool.
So I've definitely listened to Abbey Road in the last couple of months.
Yeah.
And so I've heard the
Yeah,
end.
yep.
You have a record player? You just put the...
No, I just listen to them.
You just hold the vinyl...
Acoustically.
Yeah. You just spin it on your finger.
He takes an actual needle,
A sewing
spins it
needle.
really fast.
Spins it really fast.
Holds it up to his
Holds
ear.
it up to his ear.
Yeah.
Yeah, just
Out
gets
of
it out
all
that
the
way.
questions you could have just asked. I mean, do you have a record player?
assume he has the technology.
Not on the list of things. I would think the assumption would be
If
enough
you
to
listen,
not ask the question.
If you listen to a record any other way,
Yeah.
you're an amateur.
Okay, yeah,
Okay,
the real way.
The real music enthusiasts
Yes.
use a sewing needle.
Yeah. In their teeth.
Right.
And then
Yeah.
they spin it on their
Yeah.
finger.
Yeah.
Yeah, it
And
produces
the teeth transmits the vibrations up through
Into
the teeth,
ear bone.
into the jaw,
Yeah.
up into the ear
Yeah.
canal. Yep.
Only amateurs
Yes.
put it through the technology. Got to
Yeah.
hear it live.
Yeah.
And
The
feel
way
it
that
in
it
your
was
mouth.
meant to be.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Mouthfeel.
It was written for mouthfeel. Yeah, that's the interview I want to see with Paul and John sitting there cross-legged, doing LSD. And they're like, so what were you thinking when you wrote this one? Or how it would feel in your incisors.
Mouthfeel.
Yeah. I wanted people to get it in their molars.
Go ahead and say that in a Liverpool accent.
Oh,
Oh, jeez.
No.
What do they sound like?
I wanted to see what it would feel like in the mouth.
Hey, English people that listen to the show, call in to the non-existent number. Leave us a message and tell us what it would sound like in your mouth. Cheating and honesty. Hey guys, I recently removed myself from an emotionally abusive relationship. The man I had been with came from a past where he had been cheated on many times, and so constantly accused me of not being honest and drilled that honesty is the most important thing. He would constantly call me a liar, even though I was 100% honest with him. A couple days after I left, I discovered he'd been cheating on me. In an unhealthy way, this makes me feel like all the abuse I suffered was for nothing. How do I process this? Thanks, Anonymous.
Good question.
Yeah, first, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
I'm sorry that, A, the breakup happened. I'm sorry that you were in an emotionally abusive relationship. And I'm sorry that afterward you discovered really bad news. And that's not okay. So all of that, I think, first off, we need to acknowledge that is horrible news. And I'm sorry, friend. Having said that, I think some of this, Nick, you and I probably would say there's a likelihood that humans who have been through bad things sometimes reenact bad things or sometimes become more likely to do those bad things.
Yeah, I mean, Jim's favorite thing to say is hurting people hurt people.
It is my favorite thing.
It is.
That's what I say when I answer my phone.
Yeah, that and mouth sound. Or no, what's it?
Mouthfeel?
Mouthfeel. Mouthfeel and hurting people
What's
hurt
the
people.
mouthfeel of the album?
Yeah.
What?
Yeah, I mean, this isn't uncommon in that sense.
Yeah.
I think I've heard this before from a lot of people that, if they're doing the behavior, they become super
Vigilant.
vigilant of the other person doing it.
Yeah.
I wish you were here so we could actually converse back and forth, because what I'd want to know is, you said that this makes me feel like all the abuse I suffered was for nothing. I'd like to hear you talk more about that.
Yeah.
Like, what do you mean by that? Because abuse is abuse, and it's, suffering through that is going to be suffering through it, whether the relationship ended and you finding out he cheated or he didn't cheat.
Right.
It's still hurtful. So I'm wondering how you perceive the hurt as being different, knowing that he cheated versus if he hadn't.
Yeah.
I would want to explore that a little bit more, because that's the piece I don't have a good feel for.
Yeah, I get it. Yeah, there's some confusion with that. And I kind of understand where the person's coming from, because if they're saying, listen, I went through a really bad relationship, it was abusive, I was holding in there. And I think this is tricky, right? Because sometimes, some people will use that phrase gaslighting, which I've never really been super duper fond of, because I think it's a little too vague. But in this situation, obviously the person's like, hey man, you were constantly making me bend over backwards to ease your fears that I was talking to somebody else or doing something behind your back. I wasn't. And so that was crazy making, because I was constantly on defense. And meanwhile, you were kind of doing this whole thing out there. Obviously, it's hypocrisy. And obviously, I feel like, there's the sting of the betrayal, okay, but then there's also the other piece of it, which is like, wow, you were constantly patrolling me for the exact thing you were doing. And I think that's a mix of emotions that come out of that, right? Like you're angry, you're bitter about that, you're super resentful about that. I think you're throwing your hands up in shock and just there's a desire for justice. Like you want the world to kind of side with you and be like, what? That was not fair. That's not okay. And yet, I guess at the end of the day, you're left with that bag of emotion of the breakup. You don't have any recourse.
I can tell you how I would deal with something like this. And I'm not saying that this is the right way or if this is even possible for everybody to deal with it this way. But if I were in this situation, the way that I tend to deal with situations like this is rephrase it into growth and kind of change the perspective on it into a growth experience. Mm-hmm. If I leave something knowing more than what I did when I first started, to me, that's growth. And I always try to make it, and sometimes it's difficult. Sometimes it's really hard to rephrase it in a way that makes it seem like, yeah, this was a good thing. Right. and sometimes it's not. It's just not, we're not going to be able to convince ourselves that this was a good thing that happened. Right. But if you can at least say at the end of the day, I learned something from this. Sure. I grew from this experience. Fair. I feel like I'm a better person today. Now, that doesn't mean that it was worth it.
No, yeah, you don't have to be grateful it happened.
Exactly. We don't have to be grateful for it.
No.
We don't have to say it was worth it happening.
Or good.
Yeah, but if at the end of the day you can say, you know what, I feel like in my next relationship, I've learned some things that I can take with me. Yeah. And I feel like I've learned some things about myself. Because honestly, going through pain and going through hardship, we end up learning a lot about ourselves. Yeah. And if you can try to find something positive out of this experience that you gained, that's probably going to be a good start.
I like that. That's solid. And to the writer, there's a question you asked that I want to answer. There's a question you didn't ask that I'm going to offer some feedback on. But the question you asked is, how do I process this? So the answer is, you talk about it. Mm-hmm. Okay, you language this. That might be with a therapist for a little while. That might be just kind of some crisis counseling, kind of some grieving counseling or some trauma counseling and saying, hey, this is a yucky thing that just happened. And sometimes people do want to kind of debrief after a breakup and sort of contemplate what went wrong, what happened, what was my truth. And sometimes there's a really, really good thing that comes out of that. And so processing it and healing from it, I think, requires encountering it, languaging it, and kind of intentionally dialoguing through it, which I do think is a very healing thing for you, writer. And I encourage you to do that. Some people will say, am I allowed to go see a therapist for something like this? Aren't therapists only for depression? Aren't therapists only for anxiety? Aren't therapists only if you got an alcohol problem? No, therapists can also be for a breakup, because, hey, it's causing anguish and it's not good for you. So that's fair, but there's another question you didn't ask that I want to add some thoughts to. Your boyfriend, ex-boyfriend, seems to have developed his hypervigilance, his fear that you're going to cheat because he's been in relationships where he was cheated on. Now, whether or not that resulted in him cheating, I can't say. I don't know that there's a clear reason people cheat. I subscribe to the theory that people, look outside of relationships when there's things that are just missing in the relationship. People ask, is it once a cheater, always a cheater? Is it like a personality trait? No, I don't think there's any data to tell us that. So I don't think that the best reason for him cheating has to do with his past. It could have influenced it. But I do think his hypervigilance about you and his fear that you might go out and talk to somebody obviously was greatly influenced by what he went through previous to you. So here's the question you didn't ask. What happens to me now when I go into my future relationships?
Yep. I was going to bring that up too.
Oh, yeah. I think we're both looking at it. Mm-hmm. So yeah, I'm nervous for that, writer, because I don't want you to become yourself hypervigilant and nervous and fearful, and it's going to happen. And that trauma is going to influence you. Yeah. And that's a tricky thing to deal with when you go into the next relationship.
Yeah, it becomes a real challenge, kind of a balancing act, to be able to take the things that you've learned from previous relationships and apply them into the next relationship without making the new relationship toxic, without bringing up the bad stuff. It's kind of like you have to take the learning experience without bringing Like you got to take that learning experience. You have to let that settle.
Yeah.
You have to clean it. You got to sanitize it, and you can bring it in. But you can't bring in your baggage into the next relationship. I think that's the fine line, becomes very complicated.
Well, it's just the knowledge that just because you know one asshole, everybody else isn't necessarily an asshole.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But yeah, that person's an asshole.
Done.
That doesn't mean everybody is an asshole.
Yeah, and you got to be careful with that trauma, writer, because that's the nature of trauma.
Right.
Trauma imprints upon us, and then anything that reminds us of that causes us to disproportionately react. And so when we're in our next relationship and the boyfriend says, hey, I'm going out with some friends after work to have a beer, we immediately go, oh my God, there's another person, there's a whole thing here, I got to dig deeper, I got to get on the internet and find out who he's hanging out with, and I better ask for, give it GPS coordinates, it's like, whoa. That's trauma. Okay,
Right.
Your trauma is causing you to have a big response to a very small clue that doesn't necessarily indicate this crime. But because you've survived something like this, it can cause you to be terrified of it ongoing.
Right.
How does a human beat that? I think therapy.
Yeah.
I think that's usually a good place to encounter that, unpack that trauma. Nick and I have talked in the past about how do even legal people, cops, lawyers who see some scary stuff, how do they kind of make sure that trauma doesn't come with them into their lives?
Right.
And a big part of it is taking your pants off. Nick's talked a lot about that.
Debrief is
Yeah,
what I said.
and I don't fully understand the science about it, but Nick
Apparently
seems
not.
very convinced.
Checks out, though.
Checks out. I type it in all the time, and apparently that's how it is.
I debrief before all of my showers, and I recommend it.
Yeah, and you know what? No trauma in there.
No.
Just soapy.
Now, one thing I have to say, Ryder, you said a couple days after I left. So you chose to leave that relationship, and good for you.
Yeah.
I mean, it sounds like you saw that this was toxic, that this was not helpful, and you decided to get out of there. So I just want to congratulate you and recognize some good decisions that you're making, because sometimes it can be really easy to focus on the negative, but it sounds like you made a good choice.
Yes.
You got out of that relationship. So
Yeah.
that needs to be recognized.
Yeah, it's allowed to affect you, Ryder. And you know what? It's going to, whether you like it or not. I encourage you. I like that you wrote into our show. Clearly you're thinking about this. Clearly your insight is there. And clearly you're willing to think and talk about it.
Mm-hmm.
Parlay that into, a therapeutic encounter, or even just with friends, sitting down with some trusted friends and asking them, say, listen, I'm not really looking for advice, but I've been kind of told and heard that it's good to process things after it's happened in this intentional kind of way. And, hey, sitting down and having that conversation in a meaningful way can really take some of the sting off that memory and set you up for success in the future.
Mm-hmm.
Great question.
Yeah, thank you for writing in.
A lot of people relate to that. All right, so we're at the end of our show, and we want to make sure that we're thanking all the folks who have been supporting us at patreon.com/therapy. If you're somebody who listens to our show on Thursdays when it airs, and you're wondering, why would I want the uncut, unedited episode? What am I missing?
About an extra hour.
It's about an hour. Yeah, it's about an hour of content. You get an hour of therapy session with us, but we do an entire pre-show. And it ranges, it's a lot more us as we really are as human beings.
It's usually just us talking.
It's usually us talking about life, about stuff, and it's pretty funny usually. There's a lot of stories in there. So, feel free to go to patreon.com/therapy. If you just want to try it out, kick us $1. It takes $1 to get into the feed. And, if you like it and you hang around and, after a little while you say, yeah, I really like Pod Therapy, and I'm glad these guys are doing that, and I signed in for $1. Feel free to upgrade to something else. Does anything cool happen? Yeah, you get recognized.
We'll allow it.
We'll thank you for it. But at the end of the day, you're just empowering a mental health conversation that you find good and you want others to have access to. So,
and if you want to leave a review, please feel free to do that.
Yeah. I believe they only work if they're 5-star.
If you want to leave a review on YouTube.
Yeah. Jeez.
No, here's the deal.
Yeah.
5 stars, but write whatever you want.
Yeah. No, yeah. Bash us. Yeah.
Content.
5.
Yes.
Yeah.
But always 5 stars.
You want us to read it? Hit 5. Because if it's a 1, we're just not even going to look at you. And so, you know what? Joke's on you.
For 5 stars.
That is a lie.
Yeah.
That is a blatant lie.
Those are the ones I
Everybody
print and
knows it.
obsess over. Those are the ones that have my tear stains all over them.
For 5 stars, you can say anything you want.
That's right. Yeah, and we will actually read it on air.
If you want me to read your reviews,
oh yes,
good
please.
luck. Good luck.
Yeah, go to audioguyLifeCoaching.com. We especially want to thank our bosses, the Elite Eight, the mysterious and shrouded Illuminati members of our fan club, the Therapy Producers. Thank you, Smitty Scoop, Jake Schneider, Robert Brownie, Jr. Mint, Kayla Lansbury, Elio Dare, Judy Schneider, Nathan's Hot Dog Scoop, Dr. Ben Don, and ex officio board member Crazy Banana Scoop.
If you'd like to hear this episode uncut and unedited and enjoy our spontaneous side projects, go to patreon.com/therapy. And thank you for supporting mental health.
That's all the time that we've got for this week's session because Nick's got a tea time that we must honor.
Thank you.
We want to thank our landlords, the Ice Cream Social Podcast. Thanks to those of you who contributed to our show today. We really appreciate it. Remember, pod therapy isn't something you should keep all to yourself. Share this episode with someone who needs it by opening the episode description in your podcast app, copying and pasting the link provided into your social media. Don't forget, you can find us at facebook.com/podtherapy, on Twitter @PodTherapyGuys, on Instagram @PodTherapyGuys, and at patreon.com/therapy.
Do you want to submit a question to the show? Ask anonymously at podtherapy.net or email us at podtherapyguys@gmail.com. I'm Nick Tangeman.
I'm Ringo Harrison.
Thanks, and we'll see you for your appointment next week.
I'm trying to figure out how old Jim's kid is.
I'm just rounding numbers at this point.